Hey night traveler, welcome to the Stealth Podcast. Here, you'll hear chilling stories to help you drift off or keep you awake. If you're into that vibe, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, kill the lights, put your headphones on, and let's hit the road. So, I'm about to tell you about the worst night of my life. What started as a peaceful solo trip to the California redwoods turned into a nightmare I still can't shake off. I parked my van in what I thought was a secluded, safe spot deep in the forest, just wanting some peace and quiet away from the city. But that night, I stumbled onto something I was never supposed to see: fresh bodies hidden among the trees. And whoever put them there, they were still around. What followed was the most terrifying game of cat and mouse, where one wrong move meant I'd end up just like those poor souls I found. I barely made it out alive, and honestly, I'm not sure I'll ever be the same. My name is Darren Lee. I'm 43 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I've been doing the van life thing for about 2 years now, ever since my divorce finalized and I realized I didn't want to be tied down to any one place anymore. My van, a 2018 Ford Transit I named Stella, became my home, my therapy, and my escape all rolled into one. I work remotely as a graphic designer, so as long as I've got my laptop and a decent internet connection, I can work from anywhere. It's been liberating, honestly. No mortgage, no nosy neighbors, just me and the open road. I'd been planning this trip to Northern California for months. The redwood forests have been calling to me. Those massive, ancient trees that make you feel incredibly small and somehow connected to something bigger at the same time. I wanted to get some photography done, maybe find some inspiration for a client project, and just disconnect from the digital noise for a few days. My buddy Marcus, who I met at a Vanlife meetup in Seattle last year, had warned me about going solo into really remote areas. "Man, at least let someone know where you're camping," he'd said over beers. But I brushed it off. I'd done plenty of solo trips before. What could go wrong? I left Portland early on a Thursday morning in late September, when the summer crowds had thinned out, but the weather was still decent. The drive down through Oregon and into California was beautiful, rolling hills giving way to dense forests, the air getting warmer as I headed south. I stopped in a small town called Willits to grab supplies, some canned food, fresh water, propane for my camp stove, and way too much coffee. The guy at the general store, probably in his 70s with a thick gray beard, gave me a strange look when I told him I was heading deep into the Six Rivers National Forest area. "Not many folks go out that way this time of year," he said, scratching his beard. "Just be careful, son." I thanked him and figured he was just being a typical small-town warrior. By late afternoon, I was winding through narrow forest roads, my GPS signal cutting in and out as the trees grew thicker and taller. The sunlight barely penetrated the canopy here, creating this eerie twilight effect, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. I passed maybe 2 other vehicles in an hour, a beat-up pickup truck and what looked like a Forest Service vehicle. Eventually, I found what seemed like the perfect spot, a small clearing off a fire road, surrounded by massive redwoods and thick undergrowth. There was an old stone fire ring, suggesting others had camped here before, but no fresh signs of recent activity. No trash, no tire tracks, nothing. It felt secluded and peaceful, exactly what I was looking for. I pulled Stella into the clearing, set up my camp chair, and cracked open a beer, feeling pretty damn good about life. The first couple of hours were perfect. I cooked some pasta on my camp stove, listened to a podcast, and watched the light fade through the trees. The forest was alive with sounds, birds settling in for the night, the distant rush of what might have been a creek, branches creaking in the wind. As darkness fell, I fired up my portable speaker and put on some low music, nothing too loud because I didn't want to disturb the natural vibe. Around 9, I decided to take a short walk before bed. I grabbed my headlamp and my phone, thinking I'd just stretch my legs for 15 minutes or so. The forest at night is a different beast entirely. Sounds get amplified, shadows play tricks on your eyes, and every snapping twig makes your heart jump a little. But I loved it, that mix of fear and exhilaration. I followed a small trail that led away from my campsite, probably an old deer path, just wandering and enjoying the solitude. That's when everything changed. That's when I saw the first body. I almost didn't see her at first. My headlamp beam was bouncing around as I walked, catching tree trunks and ferns, when it swept across what looked like a pile of clothes about 20 feet off the trail. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had dumped trash out here or left behind camping gear. But something made me stop. Something felt wrong. I took a few steps closer, my heart already starting to pound harder, and that's when I saw the hand. Pale, fingers slightly curled, unmistakably human. I froze completely, my breath catching in my throat. The beam of my headlamp was shaking now because my whole body was trembling. I forced myself to take another step, and then I saw her face. A woman, maybe in her 30s, with long dark hair matted with blood and dirt. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. The smell hit me then. That sickly sweet, disturbing odor of death that I'd never experienced before but instantly recognized. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root, my mind racing. This was real. This was actually happening. My first instinct was to run back to my van, but my legs felt like they were made of concrete. I stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. Should I call the police? I fumbled for my phone, but of course there was no signal. I was too deep in the forest. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. Okay, think, Darren, think. I needed to get back to civilization, find a signal, report this. But then another thought crept in, a scary one that made my stomach twist. Whoever did this, where were they now? How long ago did this happen? The woman's body didn't look like it had been there for weeks or months. She looked recent, maybe days, maybe less. I swept my headlamp around the immediate area, suddenly terrified that I wasn't alone out here. The forest, which had felt peaceful and alive just minutes ago, now felt menacing and claustrophobic. Every shadow could be hiding someone. Every sound could be footsteps. I started backing away slowly, keeping my light on the body because some irrational part of me was afraid to turn my back on it. That's when my beam caught something else, maybe 15 feet to the left. Another shape, another body. This one was a man, lying face down, wearing what looked like hiking gear. Oh God, this wasn't just one person. This was multiple victims. This was a dumping ground. My mind immediately went to all those true crime documentaries I'd watched. Stories about serial killers who used remote forests to dispose of their victims. I was in the middle of a crime scene, possibly an active one. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I needed to get out of here now. I turned and started walking quickly back toward the trail, trying to remember which direction I'd come from. The problem with wandering in the dark is that everything looks different, and panic makes it worse. Trees that I thought I'd passed looked unfamiliar. Was this the right path? Then I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my body stand up. A branch snapping, somewhere behind me and to the right. Not a small branch, like a squirrel or bird might break. A big branch, the kind that breaks under human weight. I stopped moving, holding my breath, listening. Silence. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a deer. But then I heard it again, closer this time. Definitely footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the underbrush. Someone was out there. Someone was moving through the forest, and they were between me and where I thought my campsite was. My mind raced through options. Should I turn off my headlamp and try to hide? Should I run? Should I call out, in case it was another hiker who might help me? But what if it wasn't another hiker? What if it was the person who'd left those bodies there? I made a split-second decision and clicked off my headlamp, plunging myself into almost complete darkness. The forest at night without any light is absolutely terrifying. You can't see your hand in front of your face. I crouched down behind a massive redwood trunk, trying to control my breathing, trying to stay absolutely silent. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I waited, listening. The footsteps had stopped. Maybe 30 seconds passed, maybe a minute. Time felt weird. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice. Male, not too far away, maybe 50 feet. I know you're out here. The words were calm, almost conversational, which somehow made them more disturbing than if he'd been yelling. Saw your headlamp. Saw you find them. My entire body went rigid. He'd been watching me. He'd seen me discover the bodies, which meant he'd been close by the whole time. This wasn't a random encounter. He'd been waiting, watching. Maybe he'd been watching my campsite too. The voice came again, slightly closer now. You shouldn't have come out here tonight, friend. Wrong place, wrong time. I pressed myself against the tree, barely breathing, my mind screaming at me to move, to run, to do something. But I was paralyzed with fear. I stayed frozen behind that tree for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. The silence was somehow worse than the voice had been. At least when he was talking, I knew where he was. Now, in the absolute darkness, he could be anywhere. He could be 10 feet away, and I wouldn't know until it was too late. My legs were cramping from crouching, and I knew I couldn't stay in this position much longer. I had to make a move. Very slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, cupping my hand over the screen to block as much light as possible when I turned it on. Still no signal, of course, but the screen gave off just enough glow for me to see maybe 3 feet in front of me. I needed to get back to Stella, get in, lock the doors, and drive the hell out of here. The problem was, I had no idea which direction my van was anymore. I'd gotten completely turned around in my panic. Then I heard the footsteps again, but this time they were moving away from me, heading off to my left. Was he leaving? Or was this some kind of trick to make me move? I waited another minute, listening hard, and the sounds continued to fade. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe he thought I'd run off in a different direction. I had to take the chance. I stood up slowly, my legs protesting, and started moving as quietly as I could in what I hoped was the direction of my campsite. Every step felt impossibly loud, leaves crunching, twigs snapping under my feet. I was trying to move in darkness while he probably knew this forest like the back of his hand. After maybe 5 minutes of careful walking, I saw something that made my heart leap, a faint glow through the trees. My camp lantern. I'd left it on inside Stella. I'd never been so happy to see that warm orange light in my life. I moved faster now, abandoning stealth for speed, pushing through branches and undergrowth. I could see Stella clearly now, maybe 40 yards away, sitting in the clearing exactly where I'd left her. Almost there. Almost safe. I was maybe 20 feet from my van when I heard running footsteps behind me. Fast, heavy, closing in quick. He'd been waiting. He'd been watching the van, knowing I'd come back to it. I didn't look back, just sprinted the last few yards, my hand fumbling for my keys in my pocket. My fingers closed around them just as I reached the driver's side door. I jammed the key into the lock. I'd never bothered getting the automatic locks fixed, and yanked the door open. A hand grabbed my shoulder, gripping hard, trying to pull me backward. I screamed and twisted away, feeling his fingers slip on my jacket. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, hitting the lock button. Through the window, I finally saw him. He was younger than I'd imagined from his voice, maybe mid-30s, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap. Average height, average build, the kind of guy who'd disappear in a crowd. But his eyes, illuminated by my dome light, were wrong. Cold and flat, like a shark's eyes. He didn't look angry or crazed like you'd expect from a killer in a movie. He just looked calm and determined, like this was just another day at work for him. He pulled on the door handle, testing it, then moved to the passenger side. I scrambled across the seat and made sure that door was locked too. He circled around to the back doors, checking each one methodically. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. Come on, start. The engine turned over with a beautiful roar, and I've never been so grateful for German engineering in my life. I threw Stella into reverse without even looking behind me, just needing to move, to get away from him. He stepped back as I backed up, and for a second I thought he was just going to let me go. But then he did something that made my blood turn to ice. He smiled. Not a big, crazy smile, just a small, knowing smirk. And he raised his hand and pointed at my front tire. I looked down reflexively and saw it. My driver's side front tire was completely flat, sitting on the rim. He'd slashed it while I was out in the woods. He'd been at my van, disabling it, making sure I couldn't leave. The realization hit me like a brick. He'd planned this. He wasn't just reacting to me stumbling onto his dumping ground. He'd seen me arrive, watched me set up camp, and decided I was going to be his next victim. My van lurched and bumped as I tried to drive on the flat tire anyway, the steering wheel fighting me. I made it maybe 15 feet before I knew it was hopeless. Driving on a completely flat tire through rough terrain at night, I'd destroy the rim, probably the axle too, and then I'd be completely stuck. I was trapped. I sat there for maybe 3 seconds, my mind racing through options. Stay in the van and wait him out? He could just break a window. Try to change the tire? That would take at least 15 minutes, and he'd be on me before I got 2 lug nuts off. Then I remembered something. My spare tire wasn't the only thing I had that could help me. I had a mountain bike mounted on the back of Stella. It wasn't fancy, just a decent trail bike I'd picked up at a garage sale, but it was transportation. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him walking slowly toward the van, something in his right hand now. A knife, long blade catching the moonlight. He wasn't rushing because he knew I was trapped. He had all the time in the world. I twisted around and looked at the back of the van. My bike was still there, locked to the rack with a cable lock. The key was on my keychain. I could do this. I had maybe 20 seconds before he reached the van. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and scrambled into the back of the van. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the back door open from the inside. I popped it and jumped out, immediately going for the bike lock. He saw what I was doing and started running. My fingers fumbled with the tiny key, missing the lock once, twice. "Come on, Darren." He was 10 feet away. The lock clicked open and I yanked the bike free just as his hand reached for me. I swung the bike between us like a barrier, and he had to jump back to avoid getting hit. Then I was on the bike, pedaling hard before I even had my other foot on the pedal, wobbling dangerously, but moving. The fire road was rough and full of ruts, and I could barely see where I was going with just the moonlight filtering through the trees, but I didn't care. I was putting distance between me and that knife. I could hear him behind me, running, his footsteps pounding on the packed dirt. I pedaled harder, my lungs already burning. The bike bounced and jarred over rocks and roots, and I nearly wiped out twice in the first 100 yards. I didn't dare look back. The fire road curved and started going downhill, which helped with speed, but made it even harder to control the bike in the darkness. Branches whipped at my face and arms. My headlamp was still in my pocket. I'd had it off when I was hiding, and I didn't have a free hand to put it on. I was basically flying blind down a mountain on a bike, with a killer somewhere behind me. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. But what choice did I have? I hit a rock I didn't see, and the bike went airborne for a second before crashing back down. The impact sent a shock through my entire body, and I bit my tongue, tasting blood. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes of hard pedaling, I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. Either I'd outrun him, or he'd stop chasing. I slowed down slightly, gasping for air, my legs screaming. I needed to think. The fire road had to lead somewhere, back to a main road, hopefully. If I could get to a main road, I could flag down a car, get help. My phone still had no signal. I checked while riding. The road leveled out a bit, and I was able to go faster. Though every shadow looked like a person, every sound made me jump. I kept expecting him to appear in front of me, blocking the road. After another 10 minutes of riding, I saw lights ahead through the trees. Real lights. Electric lights. A building, maybe. I pedaled harder, hope surging in my chest. As I got closer, I could see it was a small ranger station or something similar, with a pickup truck parked outside and lights on inside. I was maybe 50 yards from the building when I heard the engine. A vehicle, coming up fast behind me with no headlights on. I risked a glance back and saw a dark SUV barreling down the fire road straight at me. It was him. He'd gone back for a vehicle. I swerved off the road and into the forest, the bike bouncing wildly over the rough terrain. I could hear the SUV brake hard, then a door opening. I abandoned the bike and ran on foot, crashing through undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I could see the ranger station ahead, so close. I opened my mouth to scream for help, but nothing came out except a hoarse croak. I tried again. "Help! Help me!" My voice finally worked, echoing through the trees. The lights in the ranger station went out suddenly. No. Were they leaving? Closing up for the night? Then I understood something worse. The ranger station was dark and quiet. The pickup truck outside was his. There was no help here. This was his place. He'd led me here. I'd run straight into a trap. The realization hit me like ice water. I'd been so focused on getting to what I thought was safety that I'd run straight to his hunting ground. The ranger station wasn't abandoned. It was his base. That's how he knew this forest so well. How he could move through it in the dark. How he knew exactly where to dump bodies where no one would find them for weeks or months. He probably wasn't even a real ranger, just someone who'd taken over this remote outpost. I spun around, trying to figure out which way to run, but I was completely disoriented now. The trees all looked the same in every direction. My lungs were burning, my legs felt like jelly, and I could hear him moving through the forest, taking his time. He knew I had nowhere to go. He'd probably done this before, many times. Those bodies I'd found were just the ones I'd stumbled across. How many more were out there? I kept moving, trying to stay quiet now instead of crashing through the brush. Maybe if I could hide, wait until morning, I'd have a better chance. I found a dense thicket of bushes and crawled into it, ignoring the thorns tearing at my skin. I pulled out my phone one more time, desperately hoping for even one bar of signal. Nothing. The screen's glow felt dangerous, like a beacon, so I turned it off and sat in complete darkness, trying to control my ragged breathing. I could hear him moving, circling the area. He was hunting me methodically, checking likely hiding spots. I heard his voice again, still that calm, conversational tone that made everything so much worse. You made it farther than most. I'll give you that. But this always ends the same way. You're just making it harder on yourself. The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made me want to scream. Minutes crawled by. Maybe 10, maybe 20. My whole body was cramping from staying motionless in the cramped space, covered in scratches and dirt. Then I heard something different. Another engine, distant but getting closer. A vehicle on the main road, the real road that the fire road must connect to eventually. Someone was coming. If I could get to them, flag them down, I might survive this. But I'd have to leave my hiding spot and run, and he was still out there somewhere. I waited, listening, trying to determine where he was. The engine sound was getting louder. It was now or never. I burst out of the thicket and ran toward the sound, not caring about the noise anymore. Behind me, I heard him start running too. The forest opened up ahead, and I could see the road, a real paved road, and headlights approaching. I was going to make it. I was actually going to make it. I broke through the tree line and ran directly into the road, waving my arms frantically. The vehicle, a sedan, slammed on its brakes, tires squealing. The driver's side door opened, and a woman got out, looking terrified and confused. "Please, help me. There's a man. He's trying to kill me. He has bodies in the forest." The words tumbled out in a rush. She looked at me like I was insane, and I realized how I must have looked, covered in dirt and blood, wild-eyed, babbling about murders. But then she saw him emerge from the forest behind me, and her expression changed. She believed me. "Get in," she screamed, and I ran around to the passenger side. I'd just gotten the door open when I heard the sound. A gunshot, impossibly loud, echoing through the trees. The woman staggered, a look of shock on her face, and then crumpled to the ground. I stood there frozen, watching blood pool beneath her, my mind refusing to process what had just happened. He walked out of the forest, a pistol in his hand now, not the knife. He looked at me over the roof of the car, and that same small smile played at his lips. "You should have stayed in your van, Darren." He knew my name. He must have gone through my stuff while I was out in the woods, looked at my license or something. The casual use of my name was somehow the most terrifying thing yet, making this all personal. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body just moved, sprinting down the road away from him and the dead woman and all of it. I heard another gunshot, and something whizzed past my head. I kept running, expecting any second to feel a bullet tear through my back. But it didn't come. Maybe he was out of bullets. Maybe he missed. Maybe he wanted the chase to continue. I ran until my vision started to tunnel and my legs gave out, and then I crawled into the ditch beside the road and curled up, shaking uncontrollably. I don't know how long I stayed there. Eventually, I must have passed out from exhaustion and shock. When I woke up, the sun was rising, and I could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had found the woman's body. I was alive somehow, but I'll never forget his smile, or the sound of that gunshot, or the fact that he's still out there somewhere, and he knows my name. My name is Kyle Brennan. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Sacramento, California. I've been living the van life for about 8 months now with my girlfriend Iris Chun, who's 29. We met at a rock climbing gym 2 years ago, and just clicked immediately. Same sense of adventure, same desire to live differently than the standard 9-to-5 existence. Iris worked as a nurse at UC Davis Medical Center, but she'd been getting increasingly burnt out from the long shifts and the emotional toll of the job. I was doing freelance photography, mostly weddings and corporate events, which paid the bills but didn't exactly fulfill my soul. We'd been talking about van life for over a year, watching YouTube channels, planning and saving, and finally we pulled the trigger last spring. We bought a 2016 Mercedes Sprinter that had already been partially converted, Had the basic electrical setup, insulation, and a bed platform. We spent 3 months finishing the build ourselves, adding solar panels, a little kitchen area, and making it actually livable for 2 people. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We named the van Moby because it was white and seemed appropriate. Iris had given her 2 weeks' notice at the hospital, and I cleared my schedule of any photography commitments. The plan was to spend 6 months traveling up and down the West Coast, hitting all the national parks, climbing spots, and beaches we'd been dreaming about. Her parents thought we were insane, especially her mom, who kept asking when Iris was going to settle down and give her grandchildren. My folks were more supportive, probably just relieved I seemed happy for once. We'd already done a few shorter trips, a week in Big Sur, a long weekend at Crater Lake, a few days exploring the Oregon coast. But this trip to the Northern California Redwoods was supposed to be our first real extended adventure, 3 weeks of off-grid camping and exploring. We'd left Sacramento on a Monday morning in early October, when the weather was still warm, but the summer tourist season had died down. The drive up Highway 101 was gorgeous, winding through wine country and then into increasingly dense forest. We stopped in Garberville for supplies, stocked up on fresh produce, filled our water tanks, grabbed some local beer. The guy at the outdoor store there was super helpful, marked up a map with some good dispersed camping spots that weren't overrun with people. By late afternoon, we were heading into 6 Rivers National Forest on increasingly remote dirt roads. Iris was navigating while I drove, reading off directions from the GPS when we had signal, which was getting rarer. "There should be a turnoff in about half a mile," she said, squinting at her phone. According to this forum post, there's a perfect clearing with a view of the valley. We found it exactly where the post said it would be, a beautiful flat spot surrounded by massive old-growth redwoods, with a slight opening in the canopy that gave us a view of the mountains in the distance. There was evidence of previous campers, a stone fire ring, some logs arranged as seating, but no recent trash or signs of people. It felt perfect, like our own private paradise. We high-fived and Iris jumped out to start setting up our camp chairs while I leveled the van. That first night was exactly what we'd been hoping for. We cooked dinner on our camp stove, pasta with vegetables and way too much garlic, and sat by the fire drinking wine and talking about our plans for the next few weeks. Iris was so happy, more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. The stress lines around her eyes had finally started to fade. We could hear the forest coming alive around us as darkness fell, owls hooting, small animals rustling in the undergrowth, the wind moving through the treetops hundreds of feet above us. Around midnight, we climbed into bed and fell asleep to the sound of rain starting to patter on the van roof. The next day was perfect too. We hiked about 6 miles on nearby trails, found a creek where the water was so clear you could see every stone on the bottom, took about 100 photos. That second night, we decided to explore a bit farther from camp after dinner. That's when everything went wrong. We'd finished eating around 7:30 and the sun was just starting to set, painting the sky through the trees in these incredible shades of orange and purple. Iris suggested we take a walk to work off dinner before it got fully dark, maybe find a good spot to watch the stars later. We grabbed our headlamps and a flashlight, locked up Moby, and headed out on what looked like an old logging road that branched off from where we'd parked. The road was overgrown but still passable, winding deeper into the forest. We were maybe 20 minutes into our walk, holding hands and just enjoying the peaceful evening, when Iris stopped suddenly. "Do you hear that?" she asked, tilting her head. I listened. At first I didn't hear anything unusual, just the normal forest sounds. Then I caught it. Voices, male voices, somewhere off to our left and downhill from where we were standing. Maybe other campers? I suggested, though it seemed weird. We hadn't seen any other vehicles or signs of people since we'd arrived. The voices were too distant to make out words, but there was something about the tone that felt off. Not friendly conversation around a campfire. More urgent, almost businesslike. Iris looked at me with this uncertain expression. Should we go say hi? Let them know we're camping nearby. Part of me wanted to just head back to our van and mind our own business. But another part, the photographer part that's always curious, wanted to know who else was out here. Let's just take a quick look, I said. If they seem cool, we'll introduce ourselves. If not, we'll head back. We left the logging road and started picking our way through the trees toward the voices, moving carefully in the fading light. The underbrush was thick with ferns and fallen branches, and we had to duck under low-hanging limbs constantly. As we got closer, we could see lights flickering through the trees, not campfire light, but the harsh white beams of flashlights or lanterns. We slowed down, moving more carefully now, some instinct telling us to be quiet. We came to the edge of a small ravine and looked down into a cleared area below us, maybe 40 feet down a steep slope. There were 3 men down there with 2 pickup trucks parked on what must have been another access road. They had work lights set up, the kind you'd use at a construction site, running off a generator that was humming loudly. And they were digging. Not like they were setting up a campsite or looking for something they'd lost. They were digging a hole, a big rectangular hole, with shovels. Iris grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in tight. "Kyle," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look." She pointed to something near one of the trucks, partially covered with a tarp. I squinted in the harsh light and felt my stomach drop. It was a body, a human body, wrapped in plastic. We both froze, not even breathing, just staring at the scene below us. One of the men said something I couldn't quite catch, and another one laughed. Actually laughed, while continuing to dig. They were burying someone. We were watching people bury a body in the middle of the national forest. My mind started racing, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe there was some legitimate explanation. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew. This was murder. This was a crime scene. And we were witnesses. Iris started backing away slowly, tugging on my arm, and I followed. We needed to get out of here, get back to the van, drive until we had cell service, and call the police. We'd made it maybe 10 steps back the way we'd come when I stepped on a branch. The snap echoed through the forest like a gunshot. Everything below us went silent. The generator was still running, but the men had stopped talking, stopped digging. "Did you hear that?" one of them said, his voice carrying clearly up to where we were hidden. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Iris and I stood absolutely still, pressed against a massive redwood trunk. "Probably just a deer," another voice said, but it didn't sound convinced. We heard footsteps, someone climbing up the slope toward us. A flashlight beam started sweeping back and forth through the trees, getting closer. Iris looked at me with pure terror in her eyes, and I knew we had to move. We turned and started half running, half stumbling back toward the logging road, trying to be quiet, but also trying to put distance between us and whoever was coming up that slope. Behind us, I heard the man shout, "Hey, hey, someone's up there." And then more footsteps, multiple people now, crashing through the underbrush after us. We ran. We burst out of the trees and onto the logging road, and I grabbed Iris's hand as we sprinted back the way we'd come. The problem was, we'd wandered for 20 minutes on the way out, and now we had to cover that same distance with people chasing us. My lungs were already burning, and we'd only been running for maybe 30 seconds. Behind us, I could hear at least 2 men, maybe all 3, yelling to each other. "They went up the old road," one of them shouted. "Get the truck." Oh God, they were going to use the vehicles. We'd never outrun a truck. Iris was faster than me. All those years of running half marathons, and she was pulling ahead. "Come on, Kyle," she gasped, looking back at me. The beam of a flashlight swept across the road behind us, way too close. We needed to get off the road, into the forest where the trucks couldn't follow. I yanked Iris's arm, and we veered left, plunging back into the trees. It was almost fully dark now, and running through a forest at night is basically suicidal. We were tripping over roots, getting smacked by branches, but we couldn't stop. I could hear an engine roaring to life behind us, and then headlights illuminated the logging road we'd just left. The truck was coming. We crashed through a thicket of bushes, and suddenly the ground just disappeared. We were falling, tumbling down a steep embankment, hitting rocks and roots on the way down. I landed hard at the bottom, the wind knocked out of me, pain shooting through my left shoulder. Iris landed a few feet away with a cry of pain. For a few seconds, we just lay there gasping. Above us, we could hear the truck stop, doors opening. "They went into the trees somewhere around here," a voice said. "Spread out." They couldn't have gotten far. I crawled over to Iris. "Are you okay?" I whispered. She was holding her ankle, her face twisted in pain. I think I twisted it. Maybe sprained it. This was bad. This was really bad. We couldn't run anymore, not with Iris injured. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. We'd fallen into what looked like a dry creek bed, with steep banks on either side, maybe 15 feet deep. Above us, I could see flashlight beams moving through the trees, the men searching. We needed to hide, at least until they moved on or gave up. I spotted an overhang in the creek bank, where erosion had carved out a small hollow beneath some exposed roots. It wasn't much, but it was something. I helped Iris limp over to it, and we squeezed ourselves into the space, pulling dead leaves and branches over us as best we could. It was cramped and uncomfortable and absolutely terrifying. We lay there in the darkness, pressed against each other, trying not to make a sound. My shoulder was throbbing from the fall, and I could feel Iris shaking, whether from pain or fear or both, I couldn't tell. Above us, the searchers were getting closer. I could hear their footsteps, hear them talking to each other. You see anything? Nothing. Maybe they kept running. They saw us, man. They saw everything. We can't let them get to the cops. My blood ran cold at those words. These weren't just guys who'd panic if someone found them. They were committed to silencing us, whatever it took. One of the men was right above us now, so close I could hear his breathing. His flashlight beam swept over our hiding spot, and I was certain we were done. But the leaves and branches must have concealed us enough, because the beam moved on. They're not here, the man called out. Maybe they headed back, toward the main road. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes, the voices and footsteps faded. They were moving away, back toward where we'd left the logging road. I waited another 5 minutes, just to be sure, before I dared to whisper. I think they're gone. Iris let out a shaky breath. What do we do now? That was the question, wasn't it? We needed to get back to Moby and get the hell out of here. But if the men knew we'd seen them, they might be watching our van. They might have already found it. We hadn't exactly been subtle about where we'd parked. Or they could be waiting on the road, knowing we'd have to come out eventually. My phone was in my pocket, miraculously undamaged from the fall, but of course there was no signal out here. We were on our own. We need to get to the van, I said finally. But we have to be smart about it. Stay off the roads, move through the forest, and approach from a different direction. Iris nodded, even though I could see the fear in her eyes. Her ankle was swelling up bad, but we didn't have a choice. We had to move. Getting out of that creek bed with Iris's injured ankle was brutal. I had to basically lift her up while she used her good leg to climb, both of us grunting with effort and trying to stay quiet. Once we were back on level ground, I let her lean on me and we started moving through the forest as carefully as we could. Every 50 feet or so, we'd stop and listen for any sounds of the men. The forest was dark as hell now, and we didn't dare use our headlamps in case they gave away our position. We were navigating by feel and the occasional glimpse of moonlight through the canopy. Iris was trying so hard not to slow us down, but I could tell every step on that ankle was agony. After maybe 30 minutes of painful progress, I started recognizing landmarks, a distinctive split tree, a boulder we'd passed on our walkout. We were getting close to our campsite. We approached from the opposite direction than we'd left, moving from tree to tree like we were in some kind of war movie. When we finally caught sight of Moby through the trees, my heart sank. One of the pickup trucks was parked right next to our van, and two men were standing there with flashlights, looking inside our windows. One of them tried the door handle. Locked, thank God. They've got to come back eventually, one of them said. Nobody leaves their van with all their stuff still in it. The other guy walked around Moby slowly, looking at our license plate, peering in all the windows. California plates. Sacramento registration sticker. We can find out who they are easy enough. That statement sent ice through my veins. They were going to track us down. Even if we somehow got away tonight, they'd hunt us. They knew where we lived. Iris grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. We backed away slowly, deeper into the trees. We couldn't get to our van, which meant we had no transportation, no supplies except what we had on us. Just our phones, a small flashlight, and the clothes on our backs. We needed a new plan. We have to hike out, I whispered to Iris. Get to the main highway, flag down a car. She looked at her swollen ankle, and I could see the despair in her expression. Kyle, I can barely walk. That's got to be at least 10 miles through the forest. She was right. In daylight, on good trails, with a healthy ankle, maybe we could do it. But at night, through dense forest, with her injured, it would take all night, maybe longer. But what choice did we have? We can do it, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We'll take it slow. I'll help you. She nodded, but I could see tears forming in her eyes. We started moving again, heading in what I hoped was the direction of the main highway. I'd studied the map before we came out here, and I was pretty sure if we headed generally northwest, we'd hit Highway 101 eventually. The problem was staying on course without GPS or landmarks we could see in the dark. After about an hour of slow, agonizing progress, Iris had to stop. She was shaking from exhaustion and pain, her face pale even in the dim moonlight. "I need to rest," she said, her voice cracking. "Just for a few minutes." We found a fallen log and sat down, and that's when I noticed the lights in the distance behind us. Multiple flashlights, spread out in a line, moving through the forest. They were searching systematically, and they were coming our way. They must have realized we weren't coming back to the van and decided to hunt us down. "We have to keep moving," I said, helping Iris to her feet. She whimpered in pain, but didn't argue. We pushed on, moving as fast as we could, which wasn't fast at all. The lights behind us kept getting closer. They were gaining on us, and there was nothing we could do about it. Iris was crying now, quietly, trying to keep going but clearly at her limit. Then we broke through a dense section of trees, and suddenly we could see lights ahead too. Not flashlights, but the steady glow of streetlights or building lights. Civilization. We'd made it to the edge of the forest, to some kind of road or town. Hope surged through me, and I practically carried Iris the last 100 yards. We stumbled out of the tree line and onto a paved road, a real road with lane markings. I looked both ways desperately, hoping to see a car, any car. Nothing. It was the middle of the night on a remote stretch of highway. But there was a building about 200 yards down the road. Looked like a closed gas station or rest stop, but it had lights on. We started hobbling toward it as fast as we could. Behind us, I heard voices at the forest edge. They'd seen us. They were coming. We were maybe 50 yards from the building when I realized it wasn't a gas station. It was an old ranger station, similar to the ones you see at park entrances, but this one looked abandoned or rarely used. Still, the lights were on, which meant someone might be there. Someone who could help us. "Help!" I shouted, not caring anymore who heard. "Somebody help us." Iris was stumbling beside me, barely able to put weight on her ankle. I could hear a vehicle starting up behind us. One of the trucks had made it to the road. They were going to run us down. We reached the building, and I pounded on the door with my fist. "Please, we need help. Please." The door opened, and a man in a ranger uniform stood there, looking startled. Relief flooded through me. We were safe. We'd made it. "Thank God," I gasped. "There are men chasing us. They're trying to kill us. We saw them burying a body in." The ranger's expression didn't change to concern or alarm like I expected. Instead, something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe calculation. He looked past us at the truck that was pulling up to the building, and then back at us. And that's when I saw it. On a desk behind him, visible through the open door, there was a two-way radio and what looked like a duty roster or schedule. And written on it, in handwriting I could see even from where I stood, were 3 names. The same 3 men who'd been digging that grave. This wasn't a rescue. This ranger was part of it. The building wasn't abandoned. It was their base of operations. I'd led us straight to them. The ranger's hand moved to his belt, to where his service weapon was holstered, and I didn't think. I just reacted. I shoved Iris to the side, away from the door, and she fell hard onto the pavement with a cry of pain. The truck screeched to a stop, and 2 of the men jumped out. I turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ranger had his weapon drawn now, not pointed at me yet, but ready. "Don't make this worse than it has to be," he said calmly. One of the men from the truck grabbed Iris, hauling her up off the ground despite her screaming and fighting. The other one was coming for me. I backed up against the building wall, my mind racing for any possible escape, any way out of this. There wasn't one. We were trapped, completely and totally trapped. "Who else knows you're out here?" the ranger asked, his voice still eerily calm. "Did you tell anyone where you were camping?" I thought about lying, saying yes, we told everyone, but the truth was we hadn't. We'd wanted to be spontaneous, adventurous. We hadn't filed a trip plan with anyone. My parents knew we were going to Northern California, but that was it. No specific locations, no timeline for checking in. "Nobody," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. The ranger nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Put them in the back," he said to the 2 men. They dragged Iris toward the truck, and she was screaming my name, fighting them every step. "Kyle, Kyle." I started forward, trying to get to her, but the ranger put a hand on my chest, and pushed me back against the wall. "Here's what's going to happen," he said quietly, his face inches from mine. "We're going to take a little drive back into the forest. You're going to tell us everything, where your van is, what you saw, if you took any pictures or videos. And then we're going to decide what to do with you." The casual way he said it, like he was describing a routine traffic stop, made it somehow more terrifying. They'd done this before. However many bodies were buried out in those woods, we were about to become two more. They zip-tied my hands behind my back and threw me in the truck bed. Iris was already in there, tied up too, still crying and calling my name. I wiggled over to her and pressed against her side, the only comfort I could offer. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "This is all my fault. I should have just gone back to the van immediately. I shouldn't have been curious. Stop," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "This isn't your fault. These are evil people doing evil things. That's not on you." The truck started moving, heading back into the forest on a different road than we'd used. I looked up at the stars visible above us, thought about how excited we'd been just hours ago about our adventure, about our future together. The truck drove for maybe 20 minutes before stopping. I heard the men get out, heard them talking in low voices. One of them came around to the tailgate and lowered it. He grabbed Iris first, pulling her out. She fought him, kicking with her good leg, and he hit her. Just backhanded her across the face like it was nothing. Something in me snapped. When he reached for me, I didn't try to fight. I waited until he'd pulled me halfway out of the truck bed, and then I threw my full weight backward, taking us both over the side. We hit the ground hard, and I heard him grunt in pain. With my hands still tied, I couldn't do much, but I rolled toward him and drove my knee into his stomach as hard as I could. He doubled over, gasping, and I scrambled to my feet and ran. Just ran blindly into the forest, away from the trucks, away from Iris's screaming, away from everything. I told myself I was going to get help, flag down a car, bring back the police. But the truth I have to live with every day? I was just running. I was saving myself and leaving her behind. I ran until I couldn't hear her voice anymore, until I collapsed from exhaustion somewhere deep in the woods. When the sun came up and I finally made it to the highway and flagged down a car, when the police came and searched those woods, they found our van. They found the ranger station. They found multiple graves, including fresh ones. But they never found Iris. The men were gone too, vanished like they'd never existed. The ranger station was wiped clean, and I was the only witness to a crime I couldn't prove, couldn't stop, and couldn't save the person I loved from. They never found her body. Part of me hopes that means she's still alive somewhere, but I know better. I ran, and she paid the price. That's something I'll carry forever. Let me tell you about the night that changed everything. I'm a solo traveler, been doing Vanlife for years, and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered in the backwoods of Northern California. I parked in what seemed like a peaceful, isolated spot near the Mendocino National Forest, just wanting a quiet night under the stars. Instead, I stumbled into something that still gives me nightmares, a hunting ground where people weren't just being killed, they were being hunted for sport. And when they realized I knew what they were doing, I became the next target. What followed was the longest night of my life, running through those dark woods, trying to survive until sunrise. I made choices that haunt me, saw things I can't unsee, and learned that some evils are more organized and disturbing than anything you see in horror movies. My name is Petra Voss. I'm 51 years old, and I live in Boise, Idaho. I've been living full-time in my van for almost 6 years now, ever since my divorce finalized and my kids went off to college. My Volkswagen Westphalia, a 1987 model I restored myself and named Gunther, has been my home, my sanctuary, and my escape from a life that stopped fitting me somewhere along the way. I worked as a high school biology teacher for 23 years, saved every penny I could, and when my marriage fell apart, I realized I didn't want the house, the mortgage, or the memories. I wanted freedom. My ex-husband thought I'd lost my mind. My daughter Emma supported me, but my son Jacob barely speaks to me anymore. He thinks I'm going through some kind of late-life crisis, running away from responsibility. But I'm not running from anything. I'm running towards something. Adventure, solitude, the chance to actually live instead of just existing. I work remotely now, tutoring students online in biology and chemistry, which gives me enough income to cover gas, food, and the occasional mechanical issue with Gunther. I've been all over the western United States, spent a winter in Arizona, summers in Montana and Wyoming, explored every corner of Utah and Colorado. I've met incredible people at campgrounds and trailheads, formed friendships that are somehow deeper than the ones I had in my suburban neighborhood where I lived for 2 decades. There's something about van life that strips away all the superficial stuff. You meet people as they really are, not as they pretend to be. I've also learned to be comfortable being alone, which is a skill not many people have. Some nights, I don't speak to another human being for days, and I've learned to love that silence. I'd been wanting to explore Northern California for a while, particularly the remote areas around Mendocino National Forest. I'd heard from other van lifers that there were incredible dispersed camping spots out there, places where you could go days without seeing another person. It was late September, and I'd just finished a particularly intense month of tutoring, helping 3 students prep for their SATs and college applications, and I needed to decompress. I left Boise on a Tuesday morning, drove south through Nevada and into California, taking my time and stopping wherever looked interesting. By Friday afternoon, I was on Highway 162, heading into increasingly remote territory. The landscape changed from the dry, brown hills of the Central Valley to dense forest, the air getting cooler and carrying that distinctive smell of pine and earth. I stopped in a tiny town called Covelo to stock up on supplies. The general store was one of those classic small-town places where everyone knows everyone, and a stranger like me gets noticed immediately. The woman behind the counter, probably in her 60s with gray hair and a tight bun, was friendly enough but gave me a concerned look when I told her I was planning to camp solo in the forest. "You be careful out there, hon," she said, bagging my groceries. "It's pretty isolated, especially this time of year. Most of the hunters haven't come through yet, so you'll probably have the woods to yourself. Just make sure someone knows where you are." I assured her my daughter had my general location, which was mostly true. Emma knew I was in Northern California and thanked her for the concern. She also mentioned that cell service was basically non-existent once you got deep into the forest, which I'd expected. I drove for another hour on increasingly rough roads, following directions I'd gotten from an overlanding forum. The road eventually turned to dirt, then to barely more than 2 ruts through the trees. I passed one old camper trailer that looked like it had been abandoned years ago, its windows broken and covered in moss. Finally, I found the spot I'd been looking for, a small clearing surrounded by massive pines and Douglas firs, with a view down into a valley. It was absolutely perfect, dead silent except for birdsong and the wind in the trees. I pulled Gunther into the clearing, set up my camp chair and little table, and just sat there for a while appreciating the solitude. I made myself dinner as the sun set, just a simple pasta dish, and watched the stars come out. There were so many of them, no light pollution at all, the Milky Way visible as a bright band across the sky. I went to bed around 10, feeling completely at peace. I had no idea that less than a mile away, something absolutely horrifying was happening, and that by morning, I'd be fighting for my life. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of a vehicle. Out in the deep woods like this, you don't expect to hear engines in the middle of the night, so it immediately put me on alert. I lay there in my bed in the back of Gunther, listening. The engine sound was distant but getting closer, and it had that particular rumble of a big truck or SUV. Then I heard another vehicle, maybe 2 more. A convoy of some kind, driving through the forest at 2 in the morning. That's not normal. Hunters don't drive around in the middle of the night, and it wasn't logging season. I sat up and peeked through the curtains I'd installed over Gunther's windows. I couldn't see any headlights through the trees, but I could definitely hear the vehicles. They seemed to be on a different road, parallel to where I'd come in, maybe half a mile away. The engines idled for a few minutes, then shut off. Voices carried through the still night air, but I couldn't make out words. I should have just gone back to sleep. I should have minded my own business and assumed it was Forest Service doing some kind of late-night work or locals who knew the area and had their reasons for being out here. But 6 years of solo travel had made me cautious, maybe overly so. I wanted to know who was out there, whether they were anywhere near my campsite, whether I needed to be worried. I got dressed quietly, pulled on my hiking boots, and grabbed my headlamp and the small canister of bear spray I always kept handy. I wasn't planning to get close, just wanted to see what was going on from a distance. I locked Gunther behind me and started walking through the forest toward where I'd heard the vehicles. The moon was nearly full, which gave just enough light to navigate without using my headlamp and announcing my presence. It took me about 15 minutes of careful walking to get close enough to see anything. I came to the edge of a small ridge and looked down into a clearing below. There were 3 large SUVs parked in a rough circle, their headlights all pointing inward, illuminating the center of the clearing like a stage. And in that lit area, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were people down there, maybe 10 or 12 of them, and they were armed. Not hunting rifles, but tactical-looking weapons, the kind you see in military movies. They were standing around talking, some of them drinking from bottles, laughing. And in the center of the clearing, there were 3 other people. These 3 were different. They weren't armed. They were on their knees, their hands bound behind their backs, looking terrified. 2 men and a woman, all young, maybe in their 20s or early 30s. One of the armed men walked over to the kneeling people and yanked the woman to her feet by her hair. I watched in horror as he dragged her away from the others and cut the zip ties binding her wrists. For a second, I thought maybe they were letting her go. But then he said something I could hear clearly across the distance. "You get a 5-minute head start. Use it wisely." The woman just stood there, seemingly in shock, and the man fired his weapon into the air. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the valley and the woman bolted, running into the forest beyond the clearing. The armed men started cheering and laughing. They were hunting her. This wasn't some kind of arrest or law enforcement situation. These people were hunting other people for sport. I felt like I was going to be sick. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grab onto a tree to steady myself. This couldn't be real. This couldn't actually be happening. But it was. I was watching it happen right in front of me. One of the armed men looked at his watch and called out, "Time's up." About half of them headed off into the forest in the direction the woman had run, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. They spread out in a line, communicating with hand signals. The others stayed behind with the 2 remaining captives. I needed to get out of here. I needed to get back to Gunther, drive until I had cell service, and call the police. But I was frozen, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. Then one of the men who'd stayed behind walked over to the 2 kneeling men and shot one of them in the head. Just executed him, casual as anything. The other captive started screaming, and the shooter turned to him with a smile. "Don't worry, you're next to run. We like to space them out. Makes it more interesting." I stumbled backward, my foot landing on a dry branch that snapped with a sound like another gunshot. Every head in that clearing turned in my direction. Someone shouted, "There!" up on the ridge. And suddenly flashlight beams were sweeping up the hillside, searching for me. I turned and ran, abandoning any attempt at stealth. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my face and clothes, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Behind me, I could hear them coming, multiple people climbing up the ridge. "We got another one," someone yelled, and others laughed. They thought this was funny. They thought hunting me was going to be entertaining. I had maybe a 10-minute head start to get back to Gunther, and I was 51 years old running through a dark forest while being chased by armed men who clearly had no problem killing people. My lungs were already burning, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I was dead. Just like that woman they'd sent running. Just like that man they'd executed. I was going to die out here, and nobody would ever know what happened to me. I made it back to Gunther in what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 8 or 9 minutes. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the forest, their flashlights creating crazy shadows through the trees. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my keys twice before I got the door unlocked. I threw myself into the driver's seat, started the engine. Thank God Gunther's old engine turned over immediately, and jammed it into reverse. I backed up wildly, not caring about the ruts or rocks, just needing to move. One of my pursuers broke through the tree line just as I was turning around, and he raised his weapon. I ducked instinctively and heard the rear window shatter. Glass exploded everywhere. I slammed the accelerator and Gunther lurched forward down the dirt road, fishtailing on the loose gravel. More shots, and I heard bullets hitting metal. One of my side mirrors exploded. I kept driving, hunched over the steering wheel, expecting any second to feel a bullet tear through me. The dirt road was a nightmare to navigate at speed in the dark. Gunther's headlights bounced wildly as I hit ruts and rocks, and I nearly lost control twice on sharp turns. Behind me, I could see headlights. One of their SUVs was coming after me. Of course they were. I was a witness, and these people clearly had a system worked out where witnesses didn't survive. My mind was racing. How far was it back to the main highway? An hour? 2 hours on these terrible roads. And my fuel gauge was showing less than a quarter tank. I'd been planning to fill up tomorrow in Covelo. Stupid. So stupid. The SUV behind me was gaining ground. Their vehicle was bigger, more powerful, and the driver clearly knew these roads better than I did. They were going to catch me. I pushed Gunther as hard as I dared, the old van rattling and shaking, probably doing damage to the suspension that would cost thousands to fix if I survived this. Up ahead, I saw the road split. I could keep going straight on the main forest road, or take a smaller trail that branched off to the right. The smaller trail looked barely passable, more of a hiking path than a road, but maybe that was my advantage. Gunther was smaller and more maneuverable than their massive SUV. I made a split-second decision and yanked the wheel right, taking the smaller trail. Branches scraped both sides of the van with a horrible screeching sound, and my remaining side mirror was torn off by a tree trunk. The trail was even rougher than the main road, if that was possible. I was going maybe 15 miles per hour, which felt like crawling, but any faster and I'd flip the van or destroy the axle. Behind me, I saw the SUV's headlights pause at the fork, then turn to follow me down the trail. But they were having trouble. Their vehicle was too wide, getting hung up on trees. I was putting distance between us. Maybe this would work. The trail wound through dense forest for what felt like forever, and then suddenly opened up into another clearing. But this wasn't empty wilderness. There was a structure here, a large cabin or lodge, dark and clearly abandoned. Behind it, I could see what looked like several smaller outbuildings or sheds. For a wild second, I thought about stopping, hiding inside, maybe finding a phone or some way to call for help. But something about the place felt wrong. The way it was positioned, hidden back in the woods, but clearly well-maintained despite being dark. And then I saw them. More vehicles parked behind the lodge. More of them. This was their base. This was where they operated from. I'd driven straight toward the heart of whatever sick operation this was. I kept going, driving past the lodge, looking for another way out. There had to be another road, another trail, something. Behind me, the SUV had made it through the narrow section and was accelerating across the clearing toward me. I spotted what looked like a service road leading away from the back of the property and aimed for it. But as I got closer, I saw my mistake. There was a chain across the road, and beyond it, the road dropped off steeply down the side of a hill. I slammed on the brakes, Gunther skidding to a stop maybe 10 feet from the chain. I was trapped. The SUV pulled up behind me, blocking my only escape route, and 3 men got out. I could see them clearly in Gunther's headlights reflected off the chain. 2 of them had rifles. The 3rd had a handgun. They walked toward me slowly, confidently, like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. There was nowhere for me to go. The man with the handgun knocked on my driver's side window, and when I didn't respond, he used the butt of the gun to smash it. Glass showered over me. "Turn off the engine and get out," he said calmly. "Hands where we can see them." I sat there, frozen, my mind completely blank. This was it. This was how I died. In a van in the middle of nowhere, killed by people who hunted humans for sport. Nobody would ever know what happened to me. Emma would spend the rest of her life wondering, filing missing person reports that would go nowhere. The man reached through the broken window and unlocked the door from the inside, pulling it open. I said, "Get out." He grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the van. I stumbled and fell to my knees on the gravel, my hands instinctively going out to break my fall. One of the men with rifles circled around to search Gunther while the other 2 stood over me. "Please," I managed to say, my voice coming out hoarse and terrified. "I won't tell anyone what I saw. I'll leave, drive straight out of California. You'll never see me again." The man with the handgun laughed. "Yeah, we've heard that before. Doesn't really work out that way." He pulled out a radio and spoke into it. "We got the witness. Bringing her back to the lodge. Have Marco prep another runner for Dawn." Another runner. They were going to make me run through the forest while they hunted me, just like that woman I'd seen. Just like however many others they'd done this to. The man searching Gunther came back shaking his head. No phone, no weapon, just camping gear and some books. They hadn't found my phone because it was in my jacket pocket, but it was useless anyway with no signal. The man with the handgun hauled me to my feet and started pushing me toward the SUV. My mind was racing, looking for any opportunity, any chance to escape. They were going to take me to that lodge, probably tie me up, keep me until morning when they'd have better light for their sick hunt. If I was going to make a move, it had to be now, before I got in that vehicle. We were maybe 5 steps from the SUV when I heard it. Another vehicle approaching fast on the service road behind the lodge. The men heard it too and turned to look. Headlights appeared, an old pickup truck barreling toward us. One of the men raised his rifle. Who the hell? The truck didn't slow down. It was coming straight at us. Everyone scattered. The man holding me loosened his grip for just a second as he moved to avoid being hit, and I yanked my arm free and ran. I didn't head for Gunther or the SUV or anywhere logical. I just ran for the tree line, pumping my legs as hard as they would go. Behind me, I heard shouting and then gunshots, a lot of them, rapid fire. Someone was shooting at the truck, or the truck's occupants were shooting at them. I couldn't tell. I didn't look back. I crashed into the forest and kept running, expecting any second to feel a bullet hit me. But the shooting continued behind me, focused on whoever was in that truck. Maybe it was Forest Service, or police, or someone who'd heard the earlier gunshots and come to investigate. Maybe it was just incredibly bad timing for the hunters and incredibly good timing for me. I didn't care. I just ran. The terrain sloped downward steeply and I half ran, half slid down the hillside, grabbing at trees and branches to slow myself. I could hear more shouting behind me now and vehicle engines. The gunshots had stopped, but there was clearly chaos happening back at the lodge. I kept going down the slope until I hit a creek at the bottom, probably the same creek that ran through the valley I'd seen earlier. The water was shallow but ice cold, and I didn't hesitate. I waded right in and started following it downstream. Water wouldn't leave tracks, and the cold creek would mask my heat signature if they had thermal imaging. I'd learned that from one of those survival shows I used to watch while grading papers in my old life. The creek twisted through the forest, sometimes shallow enough to walk on the rocky bottom, sometimes deep enough that I had to swim. My clothes were soaked and heavy, and I was starting to shiver uncontrollably, but I kept going. After what must have been an hour of following the creek, the sky started to lighten. Dawn was coming. I climbed out of the water and collapsed on the bank, my whole body shaking from cold and exhaustion. I was 51 years old, not in terrible shape, but not equipped for this kind of physical ordeal. Everything hurt, but I was alive. I pulled out my phone, praying that maybe being lower in the valley would give me signal. Nothing. The screen was wet but still working. It showed 6:47 a.m. and 0 bars. I had to keep moving, get to higher ground or closer to civilization. I forced myself to stand and started walking parallel to the creek, staying in the cover of the trees. After maybe 30 minutes, I heard it, a vehicle on a road, the normal sound of traffic. I pushed through the trees and found myself at the edge of Highway 162, the same highway I'd taken into this nightmare. I'd somehow made it back to the main road. I stumbled out onto the shoulder, waving my arms frantically at an approaching car. It was an older couple in a sedan, and they pulled over with concerned expressions. The woman got out. "Oh my God, are you okay? Were you in an accident?" I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled and hysterical. People hunting people. In the forest, they killed someone. They were going to kill me. The couple exchanged glances, clearly thinking I was crazy or on drugs or both. But the man pulled out his phone. "I'm calling 911, he said. And that's when I looked back toward the forest and saw one of the SUVs emerge from a trail maybe a quarter mile down the road. They'd found me. The couple saw the SUV too, saw how I reacted to it, and something in my terror must have convinced them I was telling the truth. "Get in the car," the man said urgently, and I didn't hesitate. I threw myself into the back seat, and the woman jumped in front. The man was already putting the car in drive, pulling back onto the highway. Behind us, the SUV accelerated, closing the distance fast. The older man, I never even learned his name, pressed the gas pedal down and his sedan responded, but it was no match for the powerful SUV behind us. "They're catching up," the woman said, her voice high with fear. She had her phone out, talking to the 911 dispatcher. "We're on Highway 162, heading west toward Covelo. There's a vehicle pursuing us. The woman we picked up says armed men are trying to kill her." Her voice was shaking, but she was holding it together better than I was. I was curled up in the back seat, watching through the rear window as the SUV got closer and closer. Then I heard the sirens. Police, coming from the opposite direction. 2 patrol cars flew past us heading east, then did U-turns and fell in behind us, lights flashing. The SUV immediately slowed and turned off onto a side road, disappearing. The patrol cars followed it while a third one that had appeared pulled us over. The next few hours were a blur of questions, statements, medical checks, and disbelief. The police listened to my story with expressions that ranged from skeptical to horrified. They went out to the location I described, found the lodge, found my van. But by the time they got there, it had been cleaned. No bodies, no blood, no evidence of anything except my destroyed van with bullet holes in it. The lodge appeared to be an abandoned hunting cabin, nothing more. No one was there. The vehicles I described were gone. Even the clearing where I'd seen the people on their knees. When they searched it with cadaver dogs, they found nothing. The local police brought in state investigators, then FBI. They believed something had happened to me. That was obvious from my condition and the bullet damage to my van. But without bodies, without evidence, without even being able to identify who owned that lodge or who the armed men were, there was nothing they could charge anyone with. The couple who'd picked me up confirmed my state when they found me, but they hadn't seen the men hunting people. They'd just seen me, terrified and soaked, being chased by an SUV. I spent 3 days in the hospital being treated for hypothermia and exhaustion. Emma flew out from Boston, horrified by what had happened. Jacob called but didn't visit, I think because he couldn't handle seeing his mother in this state. The media got hold of the story. Vanlife woman claims human hunting ring in California forest, and most of the coverage was skeptical. Online comments suggested I'd had some kind of breakdown, or was making it up for attention, or had been on drugs. The FBI agent assigned to my case, a woman named Chun, visited me before I left California. She sat by my hospital bed and spoke quietly. Off the record, we believe you. This isn't the first report we've gotten of disappearances in that area. People who go into those forests and never come out. But these people, whoever they are, they're extremely organized and well-funded. They clean up perfectly. We've never been able to make a case stick. She paused. The couple you ran into, they saved your life by pulling over. We found the SUV that was chasing you, stolen plates, wiped clean, abandoned in a parking lot. Dead end. She looked at me with sympathy. You got lucky, Ms. Voss. Most people who stumble into what you stumbled into don't make it out. I asked her about the truck that had shown up at the lodge, the one that had created the chaos that let me escape. She frowned. We don't know anything about that. No one else reported being in that area. Maybe someone who knew what was happening and decided to intervene. Maybe just bad timing for them. Good timing for you. I couldn't go back to Vanlife. Just couldn't. The thought of sleeping alone in isolated places filled me with paralyzing fear. I sold Gunther, or what was left of him after the repairs, and moved into a small apartment in Boise. I got a job teaching at my old high school again. They welcomed me back with concerned looks and careful questions I mostly didn't answer. I see a therapist twice a week for PTSD. I have nightmares where I'm running through those woods and I can hear footsteps behind me, getting closer. I wake up screaming. Emma visits when she can, and she's been incredibly supportive, but I can see the worry in her eyes. She's afraid I'll never be the same person I was before. And she's right. I won't be, because I know what's out there. I know that somewhere in those California forests, there are people who hunt other people for sport, and they're still doing it. The woman I saw sent running, the man I saw executed, the others that Agent Chun implied were out there, they're still missing. Their families still don't have answers. And the hunters are still free, still operating, probably planning their next hunt right now. I'm alive, but at what cost? I live in constant fear. I can't enjoy the things I used to love. And worst of all, I know that somewhere, someone else is going to stumble into that nightmare just like I did. And maybe they won't be as lucky as I was. Maybe they won't make it out. That guilt is almost worse than the fear. I survived, but I couldn't save anyone else. And that haunts me every single day. I thought parking near that abandoned rest stop outside Barstow would be fine for one night. Just me trying to save some gas money on my way to visit my sister. But when I saw that RV pull up in the darkness, and those people start unloading something heavy wrapped in tarps, I knew I'd stumbled onto something I was never supposed to see. What happened next turned into the worst night of my life, and I'm lucky to be alive to tell you about it. My name is Darren Walsh. I'm 43 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I've been doing the van life thing for about 8 months now. Started after my divorce finalized, and I realized I had more freedom than I'd had in 20 years. My sister Claudia lives in San Diego, and we've been planning this visit for months. She's got 2 kids, Maya and Josh, and they were excited to see Uncle Darren's cool van. I converted an old 2015 Ford Transit myself. Nothing fancy, just a bed platform, some storage, a portable stove, and solar panels I got on sale. It wasn't Instagram worthy or anything, but it was mine. The drive down from Portland was going smooth until I hit that stretch between Bakersfield and Barstow. You know that part of California where it's just desert and more desert, and your phone loses signal for like 2 hours straight? Yeah, that part. It was getting late, around 9 p.m., and I was tired as hell. My original plan was to push through to San Bernardino and find a Walmart parking lot, but my eyes were getting heavy and I'd already downed 3 energy drinks. The smart thing, the safe thing, would have been stopping somewhere populated. But I saw this turnoff. Looked like an old rest stop that had been closed down years ago. There were some concrete barriers and faded signs, but the parking area was still accessible. I pulled in thinking I'd just catch a few hours of sleep, wake up early, and finish the drive. The place was completely empty, which I actually liked at the time. No other travelers, no truckers, no noise. Just me and the sound of desert wind hitting the van. There was this eerie quietness though, the kind that makes you aware of every little sound you make. I remember stepping out to stretch my legs and seeing absolutely nothing around. No lights from houses, no cars on the distant highway, just darkness and the silhouette of some hills against the night sky. It felt isolated in a way that should have worried me more than it did. I heated up some canned soup on my portable stove, scrolled through the photos Claudia had sent me of the kids earlier that day when I still had signal, and started getting ready for bed. That's when I heard the first vehicle. Now, hearing a car isn't unusual, right? But something about the way it sounded, slow, deliberate, like it was searching for something, made me freeze with my spoon halfway to my mouth. The headlights swept across my van's windows as it pulled into the rest stop, and I felt this weird knot form in my stomach. I turned off my interior light real quick and peeked through the curtain I'd installed. It was an old RV, probably from the 80s, white with rust stains running down the sides, and it parked right next to my van, even though the entire lot was empty. That's when I knew something was off, because why would anyone park that close when there's all this space? I sat there in the darkness of my van, soup getting cold, watching through a tiny gap in my curtain as the RV's door opened. 2 men got out first, one tall and thin wearing a baseball cap, the other shorter and stocky with a thick beard. Then a woman emerged, older maybe, with her hair pulled back tight. They didn't say much to each other, just these quiet exchanges I couldn't hear, and then they opened the back of the RV. That's when things got really disturbing. They started pulling out what looked like heavy bundles wrapped in dark tarps, and the way they were handling them. The way they kept looking around nervously even though we were miles from anywhere. Man, every instinct in my body started screaming that I needed to leave. But I couldn't just start my engine now. They'd hear it. They'd know I'd been watching. So I stayed frozen, barely breathing, as these people unloaded whatever the hell they had in that RV. The 3 of them worked in this practiced rhythm that made it clear they'd done this before. The bearded guy would drag a bundle to the edge of the RV. The tall one would help lower it, and the woman would direct them with hand signals toward this spot behind some concrete barriers where old picnic tables had rotted away. I counted 4 bundles total, each one maybe 5 or 6 feet long, and heavy enough that even the 2 men struggled with them. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip my knees to keep steady. I kept telling myself maybe it was construction supplies, or camping gear, or literally anything normal. But normal people don't unload stuff at an abandoned rest stop at 10 o'clock at night in the middle of nowhere. After they'd moved all the bundles, the tall guy pulled out shovels from the RV shovels. My heart just about stopped right there. They started walking toward the area behind the barriers, and I realized with horror that they were going to dig. I thought about calling the police, but my phone had 0 signal. I checked it like 5 times already. I thought about starting the van and just gunning it out of there, but the rational part of my brain kept saying maybe I was overreacting, maybe this was innocent, maybe I'd look like an idiot. That's the scary thing about situations like this. Your mind tries so hard to convince you everything's fine, even when every cell in your body knows it isn't. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, frozen in this terrible indecision, when I heard the woman's voice carry across the quiet desert air. "We need to go deeper," she said, loud enough that I caught it through my closed windows. Last time wasn't deep enough. Last time. Those two words made my blood run cold. I watched as the tall guy said something back, clearly annoyed, and the bearded one threw his shovel down in frustration. They were arguing now, their voices getting louder, and I caught fragments, something about the heat and decomposition and smell. Oh God. Oh Jesus Christ. I knew then, I absolutely knew what was in those tarps, and I needed to get the hell out of there. But just as I was reaching for my keys with trembling hands, the woman turned and looked directly at my van. I mean directly at it, like she'd known I was there the whole time. She said something to the men, and they both stopped digging and turned to look too. My stomach dropped. The tall guy started walking toward my van, shovel still in his hand, and I watched him get closer and closer through my curtain. 10 feet away. 5 feet. I could see his face now in the moonlight, hollow cheeks, dead eyes, this expression that was somehow blank and threatening at the same time. He raised the shovel, and I thought, this is it. This is how I die. In a converted van in the California desert, because I was too cheap to pay for a hotel. He slammed the shovel against my van's side panel. Bang. The whole vehicle shook, and I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming. "I know you're in there," he called out, his voice raspy like he'd smoked a million cigarettes. "Saw you pull in. Saw your light go off." Another bang, this time against my window, and I heard the glass crack. The woman was approaching now too, and the bearded guy had disappeared from view, which somehow made it worse because I didn't know where he was. My mind was racing through options. I could try to jump in the driver's seat and start the engine, but they were right there and could smash the windshield. I could stay quiet and hope they'd leave, but that ship had sailed. Or I could do the stupidest thing possible and actually open the door and try to talk my way out of this. None of these were good options. The bearded guy appeared at my driver's side door, and I heard him trying the handle. Thank God I'd locked it, something I did out of habit but never thought would actually matter. "Come on out," he said, almost friendly, which was somehow more disturbing than if he'd been aggressive. "We just want to talk." Yeah, right. People who just want to talk don't show up at abandoned rest stops with bodies wrapped in tarps. The tall guy hit my van again with the shovel, harder this time, and I heard more glass crack. They were going to break in. It was just a matter of time, and my van wasn't built to withstand a home invasion or whatever the hell this was. I made a split-second decision that probably saved my life. I grabbed my keys, crawled into the driver's seat as fast as I could, and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw it in reverse without even looking, just stomping on the gas. I felt a sickening thud as I hit someone, and heard a scream. The woman, I think. I didn't stop to check. I cranked the wheel and shifted into drive, my headlights sweeping across the scene for just a second. That's when I saw it clearly. One of the tarps had come partially unwrapped, and there was a hand sticking out. A human hand, pale and lifeless. My stomach lurched, but I kept my foot on the gas, tires spitting gravel as I fishtailed toward the exit. The RV's headlights flicked on behind me. They were coming after me. Of course they were coming after me. I'd just seen evidence of what I'm pretty sure were multiple murders and had run over one of them. My van maxed out at about 70 miles per hour on a good day, and this piece of junk RV was somehow keeping pace with me as I merged back onto the highway. There were no other cars, no witnesses, nobody to flag down for help. Just empty California desert highway stretching out in my headlights, and this nightmare in my rearview mirror. The RV pulled into the left lane like it was trying to come up beside me, and I realized with horror what they were trying to do. They were going to run me off the road. I swerved right as they came alongside me. Their RV, so close I could see the bearded guy in the passenger seat, his face twisted with rage, blood running down his forehead from where I must have hit him. He was pointing at me, shouting something to the driver. The RV lurched toward me, and I yanked my wheel hard right, my van's tires hitting the shoulder, kicking up dust and rocks. I overcorrected and swerved back onto the highway, barely keeping control. My hands were so slick with sweat I could barely grip the steering wheel. The speedometer was pushing 80 now, way faster than I should have been going in this thing, and every bump and curve felt like the van might just flip over and in this whole nightmare in a roll of twisted metal. Then I saw something that gave me hope. Lights in the distance. Civilization. Maybe a gas station or a town, somewhere with people and cameras and safety. I pushed the accelerator as hard as it would go, the engine screaming, black smoke probably pouring from the exhaust. The RV was still behind me, but starting to fall back a little. Maybe their vehicle couldn't maintain this speed, or maybe they realized chasing me toward a populated area was too risky. I didn't care. I just kept driving, my eyes locked on those lights getting closer. But as I got nearer, my hope started to die. It wasn't a town. It was just a single streetlight at an intersection, illuminating nothing but more empty desert road. And my gas gauge was dropping fast. I'd been planning to fill up in Barstow, but now I was burning through fuel at a terrifying rate, and I could feel the van starting to sputter. The van coughed and jerked, the engine misfiring as I pushed it beyond what it could handle. The temperature gauge was redlining, and I could smell something burning. Oil maybe, or the transmission cooking itself. The RV had fallen back about a quarter mile, but was still there, still following. These predators who couldn't afford to let me get away. I was a witness. I'd seen the bodies. I'd seen their faces. They had to catch me, or their whole operation, whatever sick thing they were running, would be over. My mind was racing through possibilities. Could I outrun them on foot if the van died? No, they'd run me down in minutes in this open desert. Could I hide? Where the hell would I hide out here? That's when I spotted a turnoff ahead, barely visible. One of those rough dirt roads that probably led to some mining operation or desert property. It was a gamble, but staying on the highway meant running out of gas in the open where they could easily find me. I killed my headlights and took the turn fast, way too fast, the van bouncing violently over ruts and rocks. I heard something crack underneath, maybe the exhaust pipe or the oil pan, and the steering wheel nearly ripped out of my hands. I fought to control it, branches from dead brush scraping against the sides as I pushed deeper into the darkness. Behind me, I saw the RV sail past on the highway. They'd missed the turn. I had maybe 30 seconds before they realized and came back. I drove blind for what felt like forever, but was probably just 2 minutes, the van lurching over terrain it was never designed for, until I spotted what looked like an old structure, some kind of abandoned building, maybe a mining office or storage shed from decades ago. I pulled behind it, killed the engine, and sat there in complete darkness and silence, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The desert night was absolutely quiet except for my ragged breathing. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then I heard it, the sound of the RV coming back, slower now, searching. Their headlights swept across the desert, and I saw the beam pass maybe 50 yards from where I was hiding. I held my breath as they crept along the highway, the RV moving at a crawl. They knew I'd turned off somewhere. The question was whether they'd find this particular dirt road in the darkness. Minutes dragged by like hours. My legs were cramping from pressing against the floor so hard, and I had to pee so badly it hurt, but I didn't dare move. Then the RV stopped. Just stopped right there on the highway, and I watched as all 3 of them got out. They had flashlights now, powerful ones, and they were spreading out, searching the roadside. The woman was pointing in different directions, organizing a search pattern. These people were methodical. They'd done this before, hunted people who'd seen too much. The bearded guy started walking toward my dirt road. My pulse was so loud in my ears I couldn't hear anything else. He was maybe 100 yards away, his flashlight beam sweeping back and forth and getting closer. 70 yards. 50. I realized with absolute certainty that he was going to find the tire tracks, follow them right to me, and this abandoned building would become my tomb. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. I had a tire iron in the back, a small knife I used for cooking, nothing that would help me against 3 people. The flashlight beam was getting brighter, closer, and I could hear his footsteps crunching on gravel. 40 yards. 30. Then his radio crackled, the woman's voice saying something I couldn't make out. He stopped, responded, and started walking back toward the highway. They were leaving. Actually leaving. I watched in disbelief as they climbed back into the RV and drove off, heading east, their taillights disappearing into the desert darkness. I stayed frozen in that van for another hour, maybe longer, terrified it was a trick. Maybe they'd parked somewhere down the road and were waiting for me to think I was safe and come out. My whole body was shaking, not just my hands anymore, but everything, like I was having some kind of delayed shock reaction. When I finally convinced myself they were really gone, I tried to start the van. Nothing. The engine wouldn't turn over. Whatever damage I'd done driving like a maniac through the desert had killed it completely. I was stranded out here with no phone signal, no working vehicle, and the knowledge that somewhere out there were 3 murderers who knew what I looked like and what my van looked like. I decided to wait until sunrise. At least then I could see if they came back, and I'd have a better chance of flagging down help on the highway. I spent the worst night of my life sitting in that van, jumping at every sound, convinced every rustle of wind was them coming back to finish what they'd started. I kept replaying everything in my head, thinking about all the mistakes I'd made. Stopping at that rest stop was stupid. Not leaving immediately when they parked next to me was stupid. Not calling the cops the second I had signal. Except I never had signal, but still, every decision had been wrong, and I was lucky to be alive. When the sun finally came up, I got out and assessed the damage. The van was destroyed, cracked oil pan, busted radiator, the whole undercarriage scraped to hell. It wasn't going anywhere without a tow truck. I started walking back toward the highway, and that's when I made my fatal mistake. Instead of heading west toward where I'd come from, toward potential help, I went east. I don't know why. Maybe I was disoriented. Maybe the terror had scrambled my brain, but I walked for 20 minutes in the wrong direction before I realized it. By then I was exhausted, dehydrated, the morning sun already beating down, and I had to turn around and walk back past the van and keep going the other way. I'd been walking west for maybe 10 minutes when I heard the vehicle behind me. My heart stopped. I turned around and saw it. That same white RV with the rust stains, coming up the highway toward me. They'd been driving the roads, searching, and now they'd found me out in the open with nowhere to hide and nowhere to run. I started sprinting, pure animal panic. But there was nothing out here, just flat desert on both sides of the highway. The RV accelerated, and I knew this was it. All that running, all that survival instinct, and I was going to die on this empty stretch of California highway because I'd made one wrong turn after another. The RV pulled up beside me, and the side door flew open. The woman was there, and the bearded guy, and I saw the tall one driving. "Get in," the woman said, and her voice wasn't angry or threatening. It was cold, matter of fact, like she was just doing a job. I tried to veer away, but the bearded guy jumped out and grabbed me. I fought, screaming even though there was nobody to hear, but he was strong and dragged me toward the RV. The last thing I remember clearly was being pulled inside, seeing plastic sheeting covering the floor, and smelling something chemical and horrible. Then everything went dark, and I never made it to San Diego. Claudia reported me missing 3 days later when I didn't show up. They found my van eventually, abandoned behind that old building, but they never found me. And those 3 people, they just kept doing what they'd been doing, because that's what happens when you stumble onto something you were never supposed to see, and nobody knows you're in danger until it's way too late. My name is Petra Lindholm. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I've been doing van life for about 2 years now, ever since I quit my job at the tech company and decided life was too short to spend in a cubicle. My van is a 2018 Mercedes Sprinter that I bought used and converted myself, solar panels, a small kitchen, even a little wood accent wall I'm pretty proud of. I document my travels on social media, nothing huge, but I've got maybe 15,000 followers who seem to enjoy watching me explore the country. This trip to California was supposed to be content gold, desert landscapes, quirky small towns, that perfect van life aesthetic everyone eats up. I'd spent the day exploring some areas around Riverside, filming content, and I was planning to head to Joshua Tree the next morning to catch sunrise at some of the iconic rock formations. But it was getting late, around 8 p.m., and I was exhausted from driving and filming all day. I needed to find somewhere to park for the night. Usually I'd hit up a Walmart or a Cracker Barrel. Those are pretty safe bets for overnight parking, but I was in a residential area and my van GPS was acting weird, kept losing signal. I saw this street called Marlowe Lane, quiet and tree-lined, with nice houses that looked well-maintained. Middle-class neighborhood, the kind where people probably wouldn't even notice or care about a van parked on their street for one night. I pulled onto Marlowe Lane and found a spot between 2 houses, under a big tree that would provide some shade in the morning. The street was oddly quiet for early evening. No kids playing, No people walking dogs. No one sitting on their porches, even though it was a pleasant night. But I figured people were just inside having dinner or watching TV. I did my usual evening routine, made some pasta, edited a few photos on my laptop, responded to some comments on my posts. One of my followers had warned me about parking in residential areas in California, saying some neighborhoods had gotten weird about vanlifers, but this place seemed fine, normal, safe. Around 10 p.m., I brushed my teeth, changed into my sleep clothes, and settled into my bed platform. I'd installed blackout curtains on all my windows for privacy, so once those were closed, nobody could see in and I couldn't see out. I put in my earbuds and started listening to a podcast, true crime, ironically enough, about unsolved disappearances in national parks. I was just drifting off when I felt the van rock slightly. Not like wind, like someone had bumped into it or leaned against it. I pulled out one earbud and listened. Nothing. Probably just my imagination or maybe a cat jumping on the bumper. But then I heard it. A soft scraping sound against the driver's side door, like someone testing the handle. My heart rate picked up immediately. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, listening hard. The scraping stopped, then started again on the passenger side. Someone was walking around my van, trying the doors. I'd locked everything. I always lock everything. But knowing someone was out there trying to get in made my skin crawl. I thought about calling out, asking who was there, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said staying quiet was smarter. The footsteps moved to the back doors now, and I heard the handle jiggle more aggressively. Whoever this was, they really wanted in. I reached for my phone to call 911, and that's when I noticed something disturbing. I had no signal. 0 bars. My phone had shown full service when I parked here hours ago, but now it was completely dead. No service at all. The jiggling stopped, and everything went silent again. I waited in the darkness, my phone clutched in my hand, even though it was useless, straining to hear any sound. Maybe they'd given up. Maybe it was just some drunk person who'd mistaken my van for their own car, or something innocent like that. But then I heard voices, multiple voices, low and mumbled, like several people were out there having a conversation. I couldn't make out words, just this disturbing murmur of at least 3 or 4 different people talking right outside my van. What the hell was going on? Why were multiple people surrounding my vehicle at 10:30 at night? I crawled as quietly as I could toward the front, thinking maybe I could peek through the windshield curtain and see what was happening. My hand was shaking as I pulled the fabric back just a tiny bit, maybe half an inch, just enough to see out. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were people standing in the street, not just a couple, but maybe a dozen of them, all facing my van. Men, women, different ages, just standing there in this loose semicircle, staring at my vehicle. None of them were moving. None of them were talking anymore. They were just standing there in complete silence, watching. Some were in pajamas, some in regular clothes, and their faces, God, their faces had this blank expression that was somehow worse than if they'd looked angry or threatening. I let the curtain fall back and pressed myself against the wall of the van, my mind racing. This wasn't normal. This was some Children of the Corn type horror, and I needed to get out of here. I crawled back to the driver's seat, thinking I'd just start the engine and drive away, but when I looked through the windshield again, more people had appeared. They'd moved closer too, now standing maybe 10 feet from the van, blocking the street in front of me and behind me. I was boxed in. My hands fumbled with the keys and I dropped them, the jangle of metal sounding impossibly loud in the quiet van. I found them again, got the key in the ignition, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't turn it. That's when someone knocked on the driver's side window. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I looked over, and there was a woman's face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring right at me. She smiled, and it was the creepiest smile I'd ever seen. Too wide, showing too many teeth, like someone who'd forgotten how humans are supposed to smile. "We know you're in there," she said, her voice muffled through the glass, but clear enough. "Come out and join us. It's better if you come willingly." Join them? Join them for what? I turned the key hard, and the engine started, thank God, and I threw it into drive. But I couldn't move. The people had surrounded the van completely now, pressing against it, and there were so many of them I couldn't just drive forward without running someone over. Maybe that makes me weak or stupid, but I couldn't bring myself to just mow down a bunch of people who were technically just standing there, even though everything about this situation screamed danger. The woman was still at my window, still smiling that horrible smile. "You can't leave," she said. "Nobody leaves Marlowe Lane once they park here. That's the rule." Other hands were on the van now, rocking it gently back and forth, and I heard someone trying the back doors again, harder this time, like they were trying to force them open. I pressed on the horn, laying on it hard and long, hoping someone would hear, hoping it would scare them away, but they didn't even flinch. They just kept surrounding my van, touching it, rocking it, and that woman kept smiling at me through the window like she had all the time in the world. I made a decision that probably saved my life in that moment. I revved the engine hard, making it roar, and inched forward slowly, hoping they'd move. Some of them did step back slightly, but others just stood there, letting the bumper touch their legs like they didn't care if I hit them. The woman at my window kept pace, walking alongside as I crept forward, her hand never leaving the glass, her face still pressed against it. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, and there was something wrong with her voice. It had this sing-song quality that made my skin crawl. I gave the van more gas and lurched forward, forcing people to jump aside, and I heard a sickening thump as my side mirror clipped someone. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I made it maybe 30 feet before I saw what was ahead. They dragged something into the street to block me. It looked like a big wooden barricade, the kind construction crews use, positioned right across the road. I'd have to ram through it or turn around, and turning around meant going back toward where more people were gathering. I could see them in my rearview mirror, following the van, not running but walking with this creepy synchronized pace. I slammed on the brakes and sat there, trapped between the barricade ahead and the crowd behind, my mind frantically trying to figure out what the hell to do. That's when I noticed the houses. Every single porch light was on now, and people were standing on their lawns, in their driveways, all watching me. This wasn't just a few weirdos. This was the entire neighborhood. A man approached the driver's side now, older guy, maybe 60, wearing a bathrobe. He tapped on the window politely, like he was asking for directions. "Miss, you need to turn off your engine and step out of the vehicle," he said, his tone almost friendly. "We're not going to hurt you. We just need to explain some things, help you understand how things work here." Yeah, right. Every horror movie instinct I had was screaming that getting out of this van was a death sentence. I shook my head violently, and he sighed, disappointed, then gestured to someone behind him. Two younger guys came forward carrying crowbars, and my heart just about exploded. They were going to break in. They were actually going to pry my van open like a can of sardines. I threw the van in reverse and stomped on the gas, not caring anymore who was behind me. I felt impacts, bodies hitting the van as I shot backwards, and heard screaming, but I kept going, swerving wildly. I sideswiped a parked car, metal shrieking against metal, and nearly flipped when I jumped the curb trying to avoid a cluster of people. My van crashed through someone's wooden fence, and I was suddenly tearing through a backyard, my headlights illuminating lawn furniture and a swing set before I burst through the opposite fence into the next street over. The van was making horrible grinding noises, and the steering wheel was pulling hard to the left, but it was still moving, and that's all that mattered. I found myself on another residential street. I think it was called Sycamore Drive, and I floored it, desperate to get away from Marlowe Lane and whatever insane cult situation was happening there. But as I raced down this new street, I saw something that made my stomach drop. People were coming out of these houses too, stepping onto their porches, walking into their yards, turning to watch me drive past with those same blank expressions. I passed a playground, and there were people standing there in the dark, just standing motionless, watching my van speed by. This wasn't just one street. This was the whole neighborhood. However many blocks this place covered, they were all in on it together, and I'd driven right into the middle of their territory. I saw a street sign ahead. The boundary of this neighborhood was maybe 3 blocks away if I could just keep going straight. But then I heard the sirens. Red and blue lights filled my rearview mirror, and my first reaction was relief. The police. Thank God. Someone normal who could help me. I started slowing down, ready to pull over and explain everything. But then something made me look closer at the patrol car behind me. The lights were wrong somehow, flickering in a pattern that didn't seem quite right. And as it got closer, I could see the car itself looked off. Too old, paint faded, like it was some decommissioned vehicle they'd retrofitted. And the officer driving it, I could see his face in the flashing lights, had that same blank expression as everyone else. This wasn't real police. This was them, pretending, trying to get me to stop. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, and the van surged forward, the engine screaming in protest. The fake cop car accelerated too, and I watched in my mirror as another one joined it, then another. They had multiple patrol cars, or at least vehicles dressed up to look like patrol cars, all chasing me through these residential streets. My van was rattling violently now, something definitely broken in the suspension or the axle, and I could smell burning rubber. I blew through a stop sign and nearly T-boned a minivan that was pulling out, another one of them, trying to cut me off. I swerved around it, jumped another curb, and found myself on what looked like a main road finally, something bigger than these neighborhood streets. But the main road was blocked too. They'd set up an actual roadblock, saw horses, orange cones, more of those wooden barricades, and at least 20 people standing there waiting for me. I could see the edge of the neighborhood now, just past them, where the streetlights ended and the regular California highway began. Freedom was right there, maybe 200 yards away, but they'd made sure I couldn't reach it. The fake police cars were right behind me, boxing me in, and more vehicles were approaching from the side streets. They'd coordinated this, anticipated my moves, herded me exactly where they wanted me. I was trapped and they knew it. I made a choice that was either genius or suicide. I aimed the van straight at the roadblock and floored it. The people scattered, diving out of the way as I plowed through the barricades, wood exploding against my front bumper, cones flying everywhere. Something heavy hit my windshield and spiderwebbed the glass, but I could still see through it, could still see that highway getting closer. The van was shaking itself apart, making sounds no vehicle should ever make, but it was still moving. 50 yards. 30. I was going to make it. I was actually going to make it out of this nightmare neighborhood. Then my front tire blew. Not just went flat, exploded, probably shredded on all the debris I'd driven through. The van lurched hard to the right, and I lost control completely, spinning across the roadway. I hit something, a light pole maybe, and the impact threw me against the door, my head cracking against the window. Everything went blurry and spinning, and when the van finally stopped moving, it was on its side. I was hanging from my seatbelt, blood running down my face, and through the shattered windshield I could see them approaching. All of them, dozens of people, walking calmly toward my destroyed van, and I was trapped inside, unable to move. The older man in the bathrobe reached the wreckage first, and he crouched down to look at me through the windshield, shaking his head sadly. "Such a waste," he said. "We really did try to make this easy for you." They pulled me from the wreckage, and I was too dazed to fight, my head pounding, blood dripping into my eyes. Strong hands grabbed me under the arms and dragged me across the pavement. I tried to scream, but my voice came out weak and slurred. They carried me back into the neighborhood, past all those perfect houses with their perfect lawns, and I realized through my fading consciousness that this place looked completely normal in the darkness, like any suburban California neighborhood you drive through and never think twice about. That was the horrifying part, how normal it all looked while being so deeply wrong. They took me into one of the houses on Marlowe Lane, the same street where this nightmare had started. Inside it looked like a regular home. Family photos on the walls, comfortable furniture, the smell of something baking. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. The woman who'd smiled at me through my window was there, and she guided me to a chair in the living room, almost gently. "You damaged a lot of property tonight," she said, and she actually sounded disappointed, like a teacher scolding a student. "Running was never going to work. No one who parks on our street ever leaves. That's been true for 8 years now, ever since we understood what we needed to do to stay together, to stay pure." Other people filed into the room, filling it up, all of them staring at me with those unsettling blank faces. The older man in the bathrobe started talking, explaining their philosophy, something about how the outside world was corrupted, how they created a perfect community here, how anyone who entered their territory became part of it whether they wanted to or not. He talked about the others who'd parked here before me, travelers and vanlifers like myself, and how they'd all joined the family eventually. His words were washing over me, but I couldn't really process them through the pain in my head and the terror flooding my system. I just kept thinking about my followers, how they'd wonder why I stopped posting, how no one would know where to look for me. They gave me something to drink. Water, they said, but it tasted bitter and wrong. I tried to refuse, but they forced it down my throat, holding my nose until I had to swallow or choke. Within minutes, I felt strange, disconnected, like I was watching everything happen from far away. They were talking about integration protocols, about the adjustment period, about how I'd understand in time that this was better than the lonely existence I'd had before. The woman was stroking my hair now, almost motherly, telling me about the role I'd play in their community, the work I'd do, how grateful I'd eventually be that I'd found them. But they made a critical mistake. They left me alone for just a moment, sitting in that chair while they went to prepare my room in one of the houses. The drug they'd given me was strong, but not quite strong enough, and I still had a tiny thread of consciousness, of self, that knew I had to move now or I'd be lost forever. I forced myself to stand, my legs barely working, and stumbled toward the back door. I could hear them moving around upstairs, their footsteps creaking on the floorboards. I made it outside into the backyard and kept going, climbing over fences, falling, getting up, pure animal survival instinct pushing me forward even though my body wanted to collapse. I don't remember most of the next hour. It's just fragments. Crawling through someone's garden, hiding behind a dumpster in an alley, the sound of voices calling my name, searching for me. Eventually, I made it to the actual highway, the real one beyond their neighborhood, and collapsed on the shoulder. A truck driver found me at dawn, called an ambulance, and I woke up in a hospital in Riverside. I told the police everything, gave them the street name, described the people, the fake cop cars, everything. They investigated and found nothing. Marlowe Lane existed, but according to them it was just a normal street with normal people who seemed confused and concerned that someone was making these accusations. My van was gone. They said there was no record of any accident, no damaged property, no evidence anything I described had happened. My head injury was real, the drugs in my system were real, but somehow there was no proof of anything else. The police basically implied I'd had some kind of mental break, maybe mixed substances with alcohol, and imagined the whole thing. But I know what happened. I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere in Riverside, California, there's a neighborhood that no one should ever park in, because the people there don't let you leave. They're still there, still waiting for the next traveler to make the same mistake I did. I never made it to Joshua Tree. I drove straight back to Seattle the day I was released from the hospital, and I haven't done van life since. Some nights, I still wake up hearing that woman's voice through my window, telling me it's better if I come willingly, and I know how close I came to disappearing forever into that perfect, horrible suburban nightmare. My name is Marcus Chun. I'm 51 years old, and I live in Sacramento, California. I'd been driving my converted Dodge ProMaster for about 6 months, doing weekend trips mostly, nothing too crazy. I'm a high school history teacher, divorced, kids are grown and living their own lives, so I figured why not see more of my own state while I still had the energy for it. This particular trip was supposed to be my big hurrah before school started back up. 2 weeks exploring the California coast, hitting all the spots I'd never made time for during my marriage. My ex-wife Linda used to hate camping, hated anything that didn't involve a hotel with room service, so this was my chance to finally do things my way. I'd spent the previous night in Ventura, parked at a campground that was nice but crowded and expensive. For my last night before heading home, I wanted something more peaceful, more authentic. I'd heard about this parking area in Malibu, right off Pacific Coast Highway, where you could park overnight and wake up to the sound of waves. It wasn't technically legal. There were signs about no overnight parking, but I'd read on some van life forums that people did it all the time and rarely got hassled. The key was to arrive late, leave early, don't make a scene. Simple enough. I pulled into the lot around 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night in late August. The place was basically empty except for one other vehicle way at the far end. Looked like a pickup truck with a camper shell. The ocean was gorgeous, even in the darkness, waves crashing against the rocks, that salt smell in the air. I felt pretty good about my choice. I made myself a simple dinner, just a sandwich and some chips, sat outside on my folding chair for a bit watching the stars, then cleaned up and got ready for bed. There was a public restroom at the edge of the parking lot, which was convenient. I brushed my teeth, took care of business, and headed back to my van around midnight. That's when I noticed the guy. He was standing near the pickup truck at the far end, just standing there in the shadows, and I got the distinct impression he was watching me. I couldn't see his face clearly, just his silhouette, but something about his posture made me uncomfortable. I gave a little wave, trying to be friendly. You know, acknowledge the other overnight Parker, show I'm not a threat, but he didn't wave back. Just stood there. I climbed into my van quickly, locked all the doors, and closed my curtains. Maybe he was just having a smoke or enjoying the night air. Maybe I was being paranoid. But I made sure everything was secured before I lay down to sleep. I'm a pretty light sleeper, always have been, so when I heard footsteps on gravel at around 2 a.m., I woke up immediately. Someone was walking around the parking lot, slow and deliberate. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps came closer to my van, circled it once, then moved away. I heard a strange hissing sound, quick and sharp, repeated 3 times. Then silence. The footsteps retreated, and I heard a truck door close in the distance. My heart was pounding, but I convinced myself it was probably just that guy checking out my van, maybe seeing what kind of setup I had. Vanlifers do that sometimes. We're curious about each other's builds. Still, something felt off. I lay there for another hour, unable to fall back asleep, listening to every sound. Eventually exhaustion won and I drifted off, but my dreams were uneasy, filled with shadows and strange noises that didn't make sense. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the sound of seagulls and early morning surfers arriving. The sun was just coming up, painting everything in that golden California light that makes you understand why people pay millions to live here. I felt stupid about my paranoia from the night before. Everything seemed so normal and peaceful in the daylight. I got dressed, planning to make some coffee and hit the road within the hour. But when I opened my door and stepped out, I immediately knew something was very wrong. My van was sitting at an odd angle, leaning heavily to one side. I walked around and felt my stomach drop. 3 of my tires were flat, not just low on air, completely deflated, sitting on the rims. Front passenger, rear passenger, and rear driver's side. I crouched down to look closer and saw the slash marks, clean cuts in the sidewalls. Someone had deliberately done this. That hissing sound I'd heard at 2 a.m., that was the air rushing out of my tires. While I was lying there half awake, someone had been outside my van with a knife, systematically destroying my ability to leave. The realization made me feel sick and violated in a way I'd never experienced before. The pickup truck was gone. The parking lot was empty except for my crippled van and a couple of early morning beachgoers unloading surfboards from their car. I walked over to them, this young couple, probably mid-20s, and asked if they'd seen anyone suspicious. They looked at my van, at the slashed tires, and the guy shook his head. Man, that sucks. Probably just local kids messing around. This area has some issues with that kind of thing. He gave me the number for a local towing company and wished me luck. Then they headed down to the beach with their boards. I stood there feeling helpless and angry, wondering why the hell someone would do this to a random person just trying to sleep by the ocean. I pulled out my phone to call the towing company and saw I had barely any battery left, maybe 5%. I'd forgotten to plug it in the night before, too distracted by my paranoia. And of course my van's auxiliary battery was nearly dead too because I'd been running my fridge and lights. I made the call quickly, got through to someone who said they could send a truck, but it would be at least 2 hours, maybe 3. Tuesday morning, they were backed up with calls. I gave them my location and my phone died right as I was confirming. Perfect. Just perfect. I went back to my van to try to charge my phone, but the auxiliary battery was too drained to provide any juice. I'd have to start the engine to charge it, but I was worried about running the engine with the van sitting on 3 rims, didn't want to cause more damage. So I sat there, stuck, waiting for a tow truck that might not arrive for hours, in a parking lot that was getting busier as the morning wore on. That's when I saw him. The guy from last night, or at least I thought it was him, standing up on the access road above the parking lot. Same build, same way of standing, just watching. He was there for maybe 30 seconds, then disappeared behind some bushes. My hands started shaking. Was that the person who'd slashed my tires? Was he watching to see what I'd do? Or was I being paranoid again, seeing threats where there weren't any? I couldn't tell anymore, and that uncertainty was almost worse than knowing for sure. About 20 minutes later, a white sedan pulled into the parking lot and a man got out. He was maybe 45, wearing cargo shorts and a faded t-shirt, with a baseball cap pulled low. He walked straight toward my van with this concerned expression, like he'd noticed my situation and wanted to help. "Hey man, saw your tires," he called out as he approached. "That's brutal. You need some help." There was something about his voice that seemed friendly enough, but also something that made my instincts prickle. Maybe it was just my paranoia from the night before, or maybe it was the way his eyes kept darting around, never quite settling on my face when he talked to me. I explained that I'd already called a tow truck and was just waiting. He nodded sympathetically, then offered to give me a ride to get coffee or use a phone charger while I waited. "There's a cafe about a mile up the road," he said. "Better than just sitting here in the heat, you know?" I thanked him but declined, said I'd rather stay with my van. Something in his expression shifted then, just for a second. This flash of annoyance or frustration before the friendly mask came back. "Suit yourself," he said, but he didn't leave. He just stood there, making small talk, asking about my van, where I was from, if I was traveling alone. Each question felt like he was gathering information, and I kept my answers vague and short. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You know, I saw someone messing around your van last night. Around 2 a.m. I was going to say something, but figured you were probably asleep and didn't want to scare you." I stared at him, my mind racing. How did he know what time it happened? How did he know I was asleep? And if he'd really seen someone vandalizing my van, why didn't he do anything about it? Call the cops? At least honk his horn? "Who was it?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He shrugged. Couldn't see their face. "Just some guy with a knife." Real shame. This area isn't as safe as it used to be. The way he said it, almost casual, made me realize with horrible certainty that he was the one who'd done it. This was him. And now he was standing right next to me, pretending to be a good Samaritan. I took a step back toward my van, trying to create distance without being obvious about it. "Well, thanks for letting me know. I should probably wait inside until the tow truck comes." He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "You do that. But just so you know, tow trucks can take a real long time out here. Sometimes they don't show up at all. I could give you a ride to a shop, help you get this sorted out faster." He was pushing now, trying to get me into his car, and I understood with sickening clarity what was happening. This wasn't random vandalism. This was planned. He'd slashed my tires to strand me here, and now he was trying to isolate me further, get me away from any witnesses, into his vehicle where I'd be completely at his mercy. More people were arriving at the beach now, a family with kids, some joggers, a couple of fishermen. The parking lot was getting busier, which felt like my only safety. "I'm good, really," I said firmly. "I'll wait for the tow truck." His friendly expression dropped completely, and he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Marcus." My name. He'd said my name, but I'd never told him my name. The only way he'd know it was if he'd been through my van while I was sleeping, or maybe he'd seen my registration somehow, my teacher ID card I kept on the dashboard. The realization that this man had been planning this, had targeted me specifically, had probably been watching me since I arrived last night. It hit me like a physical blow. I was in serious danger, stranded with slashed tires, a dead phone, and a predator who'd carefully set up this entire scenario. And the worst part was, I had no idea what he wanted or how far he was willing to go. I didn't answer him, just turned and climbed back into my van, slamming the door and locking it. Through the window, I could see him standing there, that pleasant mask gone now, replaced with something cold and calculating. He stood there for a full minute, just staring at my van, then walked back to his white sedan. But he didn't leave. He parked at the far end of the lot, right where that pickup truck had been the night before, and just sat there watching me. I realized then that the pickup and this sedan, they might be the same person, the same vehicle. Maybe he'd been driving the truck last night and switched to the sedan this morning. Maybe he had multiple vehicles. Either way, he was committed to this, whatever this was. I tried to stay calm and think rationally. The tow truck would arrive eventually, and when it did, I'd have a witness, someone else present who'd make it harder for this guy to do whatever he was planning. But what if the tow truck didn't come? What if he'd somehow intercepted the call? Or what if there never was a towing company and I'd been scammed? My mind was spiraling, imagining scenarios where I'd been manipulated at every turn. I looked around the van for anything I could use as a weapon. I had a tire iron, a small kitchen knife, a can of bear spray I'd bought for hiking but never used. Not much, but better than nothing. An hour passed, then another. The beach crowd changed. The morning surfers left, replaced by families setting up umbrellas and kids building sandcastles. The white sedan stayed in the parking lot the entire time, and I could see the man inside, occasionally looking down at something, maybe his phone, but mostly just watching my van. Around 10 a.m., A tow truck finally pulled into the lot, and I felt a rush of relief so intense I almost cried. I jumped out of my van and flagged down the driver, a heavy-set guy in his 50s with oil stains on his shirt. "Thank God you're here," I said. "I've been waiting for hours." The driver looked confused. "You Marcus Chin? I got a call about an hour ago saying the service was canceled, that you'd gotten it sorted out another way." My heart stopped. I never called to cancel. My phone's dead. Someone else must have. I looked over at the white sedan and saw the man smiling at me. He'd called pretending to be me and canceled my tow. The driver followed my gaze and frowned. "What's going on here, buddy?" "Some kind of scam." I quickly explained the situation. The slashed tires, the weird guy who'd been harassing me, how I needed help getting out of here. The tow truck driver looked skeptical but agreed to hook up my van. "It's going to cost extra for 3 tires on rims," he said. "Probably $500. I didn't care about the cost. I just needed to get away from this parking lot and that man in the sedan. But as the driver started working, the man got out of his sedan and approached. "Hey, I'm actually a friend of Marcus here," he called out, putting on that friendly voice again. "We were just having a disagreement earlier. I'm going to follow him to the shop. Make sure he gets taken care of." The tow truck driver looked between us, clearly not wanting to get involved in whatever drama this was. "That true?" he asked me. "No," I said firmly. "I've never met this person before. He slashed my tires, and he's been stalking me all morning." The man laughed, like I'd said something ridiculous. "Come on, Marcus, don't be like that. I'm trying to help you out here." The way he said it, so convincing and reasonable, I could see the tow truck driver starting to doubt my story. And that's when I realized this man was good at this. This wasn't his first time. He knew how to manipulate situations, how to make himself seem trustworthy while making me look paranoid or crazy. If I didn't do something drastic right now, the tow truck driver might leave me here, and then I'd be completely at this predator's mercy with no escape and no witnesses who believed me. I made a split-second decision that probably saved my life. I pulled out my wallet and grabbed all the cash I had, maybe $300, and pressed it into the tow truck driver's hand. "Please," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm a high school teacher from Sacramento. This man has been threatening me. I don't know what he wants, but I'm afraid of what he'll do if you leave me here. Please just get my van to any shop, anywhere away from here, and I'll figure out the rest." The driver looked at the money, then at my face, and something in my desperation must have convinced him because he nodded slowly. "Get in the truck," he said. "We're leaving now." The man's expression changed completely. The mask dropped, and what I saw underneath was pure rage. "You're making a big mistake," he said, and his voice had gone flat and cold. "I'll find you. It doesn't matter where you go, Marcus. I know what you drive. I know where you live. I know your routine. You think you can just leave?" The tow truck driver had heard enough. "Get away from my truck or I'm calling the cops," he said, pulling out his phone. The man stared at us for a long moment, and I saw him weighing his options, whether to escalate things right here in a public parking lot with dozens of potential witnesses, or retreat and try another approach later. He chose retreat, but the look he gave me was a promise. This wasn't over. We left the parking lot with my van loaded on the flatbed, and I watched through the rear window as the white sedan pulled out behind us, following at a distance. The tow truck driver saw it too. "That guy's really following us," he said, and now he sounded worried. "I'm calling the cops for real." He dialed 911 while driving and explained the situation. A man had vandalized a vehicle and was now following us, possibly dangerous. They told us to head to the nearest police station in Malibu, that they'd have officers waiting. The white sedan followed us for about 10 minutes, staying back, but never losing sight of us. And then suddenly it turned off onto a side street and disappeared. Just like that. Gone. We made it to the police station and I filed a report, gave them a description of the man and his vehicle, explained everything that had happened. They took it seriously, especially when the tow truck driver corroborated my story, but without a license plate number or clear identification, there wasn't much they could do immediately. They said they'd increase patrols in that area, look at traffic cameras, try to find the white sedan. But I could tell from their expressions they weren't optimistic. This kind of thing, predators who target vulnerable travelers, who are smart enough not to leave obvious evidence. It happens more than people realize, and most of the time they get away with it because their victims disappear before anyone knows something's wrong. I ended up getting 3 new tires installed, costing me almost $800 total with the tow and labor, money I really couldn't afford on a teacher's salary. The mechanic said I was lucky. The slashes were clean and hadn't damaged the rims, which would have cost thousands more. Lucky. That's what everyone kept saying. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt traumatized and violated and paranoid in a way I'd never experienced. The drive back to Sacramento was a nightmare. I kept seeing white sedans everywhere, convinced each one was him following me, that he'd somehow track me down like he'd promised. Every time I stopped for gas or food, I'd scan the parking lot obsessively, looking for threats. I made it home, sold my van 3 weeks later for half what I'd paid for it, and never did van life again. But the worst part, the part that still keeps me up at night, happened about 2 months after that incident in Malibu. I was scrolling through news stories online and saw an article about a missing person, a solo traveler, a woman in her 30s who'd been doing van life along the California coast. She'd last been seen at a beach parking lot in Malibu, right where I'd been stranded. Her van had been found abandoned with slashed tires, but she was never found. The article included a description from a witness who'd seen a man in a white sedan talking to her the day she disappeared, trying to get her to accept a ride. I stared at that article for hours, my hands shaking, understanding with horrible clarity that I'd encountered a serial predator who'd been hunting travelers along that coast for who knows how long. I'd escaped because I'd been paranoid enough, lucky enough, had just enough resources to get away. But she hadn't. And there were probably others who hadn't either. People whose disappearances never got solved because nobody knew to connect them to a beach parking lot in Malibu and a friendly man who offered help to stranded travelers. I reported what I knew to the police, gave them every detail I could remember about that morning, but I never heard back about whether it led anywhere. And sometimes late at night, I wonder if he's still out there, still slashing tires and offering rides to people who are just trying to enjoy the freedom of the road, still hunting with that patient, methodical approach that almost got me. I got lucky, but luck runs out eventually, and I think about how close I came to being just another missing person story, and I can't sleep.